what is enterprise cyber risk and cloud security? And really, enterprise risk is the ongoing process of identifying, assessing, and responding to cyber risk across the broader enterprise. This includes the people, the processes, the technologies, vendors, partners, etc., that support the business. And where this relates to cloud security is really the processes, the people, the policies, the applications, and controls used to protect the virtualized data, applications, services, and that are associated with the cloud and virtualized infrastructure. Now, you're probably wondering why this matters. One of the big things is that there's a common misconception that migrating services over to a cloud transfers virtually, if not all, the risk to the cloud service provider. And that could be an infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, any of the IaaS or the ASs as it relates to the cloud. However, as we'll discuss in a little more detail as we go through the presentation, not all risk is transferable. Some risk does remain the responsibility of the cloud services consumer or the customer. So some of the big challenges that we're seeing here at Coalfire and really across the broader industry is that, and this really aligns to defining what the challenges are, right, and how organizations are viewing these things. So this adds a little context or construct to what we're talking about. As you look on the left, approximately 50%, or basically 1 out of 2 breaches, really are the result of insecure employee actions. So these can be things like misconfigurations, leaving an AWS S3 bucket open, sharing passwords, etc. As we go down, and as it really more relates to the cloud and cloud deployments, nearly 90% of attacks that we're seeing at Coalfire and again across the broader industry are targeted at vulnerabilities in new technologies. We're all familiar with mobile devices. They've been around for a while. IoT's been around for a while, and obviously cloud's been around for a while. But with these new technologies, we're seeing a lot more attacks against those technologies and the vulnerabilities that they present to the organization, which helps to increase their overall cyber risk. When we look to the right, one of the interesting things that we found is that nearly 80% of all executives in the survey say that they're unable to keep pace with the advancing threats. So if we look at the top right and the top left, we can look at cloud as one of those new technologies, and then advancing threats as our adversaries get better and identify ways to attack us and attack these new technologies. Our executives are saying they're struggling to keep pace with the various attacks and threat vectors that are coming at them as they deploy these new solutions. And then really kind of key to the whole thing, when we look at cloud deployments, we're really bringing in a third-party organization to manage that infrastructure or that software as a service or platform as a service. And so what we're also seeing is that nearly 50% of all the breaches are originating at a third party. So this isn't just like a partner or vendor that is used as a springboard into an organization. This also includes things like cloud service deployment.
So if we start to take a look at how these risks are actually taking place inside the organizations, and we start to look at the actual events and observations we see clients both reporting as well as that we find when we're doing assessments inside the industry, this is what this slide really encompasses. And looking to the Security Cloud Alliance list here, these are the common events that are being seen. Is we continue to see data breaches in the cloud. We see misconfiguration and inadequate controls and configuration management. We see overall poor cloud security architectures that ultimately a lot of times result in lack of strategy and planning. So it kind of really goes through the list of these common events. These are really important to understand, especially when you start to consider on the right the statistics around this. And that is, 80% of organizations are reporting that they, as Doug said, having trouble with keeping up with the constantly evolving and changing infrastructure that the cloud presents. Now, this is a feature of the cloud in terms of a lot of organizations move to the cloud in order to support the business and the technology team's ability to be agile and to adapt rapidly to changing business requirements. But it puts a strain on the ability to keep up with the security of that environment to prevent the types of events we see on this list. The second stat is that in 2019 worldwide, we saw 3.18 trillion in terms of the cost of breaches related to cloud misconfigurations. And this is becoming more and more apparent. It's splashed on the news, across the media every day. Another organization, bigger and bigger, that is becoming breached and having even larger and larger data compromises associated to their environments in the cloud. And then the last statistic, which is important to pay attention to, is 46% of organizations find that their applications are deployed across the combination of public clouds and private data centers. Now, this is relevant because a hybrid architecture is probably one of the most complex architectures to try to secure. So these are just a list of the common breaches and security events and observations that we continue to see in the inside these environments in industries, and the statistics that show why these are really impactful and important to try to develop strategies to combat.
So Nate, let me ask you a question here. On the CSA's egregious 11, with all the engineering that you're doing on your side, right, from secure cloud orchestration and automation stuff, what are the one or two, or maybe even three of those 11 that you see as being probably the biggest challenge for organizations?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges that we often see is probably number 3, is the lack of security architecture and strategy. Why, right, is maybe the question. Why would this be such a big one? Well, a lot of organizations, they don't, whether it be through planning or budget or bandwidth, they don't have the time, or they don't take the time to really try to sit down and define that initial strategy for how they plan on moving into the cloud. And including, as part of that move into the cloud or development in the cloud, how they're going to be combating paradigm shifts in terms of security governance and the ability to provide a security architecture and operations that are going to adapt to that. They say to themselves that they will just start small, they'll start with low impact data, and that they will add on security and they'll take care of those things as the journey goes. But what they're not anticipating is the rate at which their teams are going to ultimately continue to expand and move data and applications into the cloud. And what they end up finding is that 12 years after the fact, or 2 years after the fact, they now have a full burgeoning cloud environment with sensitive data and a lot of very high impact applications from a risk standpoint operating in the cloud. And they got there without actually having any kind of sound strategy or governance process. And so then that leads to probably one of the second biggest things that we see, and that is the misconfigurations. By not defining that strategy and how they're going to approach it, and defining how they're going to operate and govern in that environment, they end up having a lot of misunderstandings about what they need to be doing to actually secure the environment. And at the micro level, that results in a lot of misconfigurations, poorly deployed tools, and just bad practices that resulted as a result of trying to organically grow into the cloud without a strategy.
So is it safe to assume that really number 2 and number 3, if an organization were to look at those two as priorities, that looking at the other 9, I guess it is, would kind of fall, would kind of fall in line in terms of being able to reduce an organization or enterprise's risk as it's associated with a cloud deployment?
I think that's a fair statement. And the biggest area where organizations struggle with that advice, though, is they say, maybe I'm a mid-sized business. I don't have the budget to sit down and invest on strategy sessions and strategy deliverables or strategy work. I really need to focus my budget on just getting the work done. And so they rationalize the reason why they don't sit and do the planning and the strategy and figure out the governance of the architecture and operations as justification. A lot of cloud vendors have understood this, though, and they're kind of taking away the excuse, in my opinion, as they continue to provide more and more publicly available ways to define strategy and to perform these practices, as well as a lot of consulting firms who are being able to actually put out services and free consultations to help out with this. So I think the statement that those first, the number 2 and 3 lead to a lot of the others is accurate. And I understand the reason why businesses combat that, though, and push back on doing it. But I think that as time goes on, we'll continue to see that as not a reasonable justification for not doing it.
No, thanks. I mean, from a pure enterprise risk perspective, the ones that we see, I guess, commonly across the broader enterprise, it really goes to that, really that change control component, as you brought up, in association with the overall enterprise risk management strategy, and just how that folds into governance, right? To be able to manage that enterprise risk, really at the enterprise level, so that they can deploy safely and securely in the cloud. They can take advantage of hybrid deployments. They can leverage things like CI/CD in a much more secure way. But establishing that that change control, really that overall governance structure is just a foundational way to help organizations and help themselves reduce their risk.